Okay, thank you for a really great presentation. And I have a few questions. Yeah, the first one is like, because I'm in the discipline of contemporary art, and we really like to talk about community building, participatory art, and like artworks that have value to open to the public and create a like democratic discussions. However, I think the term the public is rather general and really vague like concept, because there are really diverse people and there are also significant difference among different communities, even in the same country. So I'm really wondering, like, how can one create a method to identify their specific community and really have a dialogue? Because actually, if you see from the whole society, contemporary art is really like no one really, it's like a really small community and audience. So perhaps you can give me some example among the cases you presented, that the details of how, like, what is like describe the real community, like, or their method, yeah, of how they form a dialogue between art and the audience.
Okay, thank you. So I will start answering from taking as an example the case of study that I presented, Iconoclasistas,
Yeah.
and maybe expanding a little bit with my own experience of working with in museums that have programs specifically related to social practice. I think that in these cases, in order to it's not a matter that the artist would identify the community, but it's we need to think it in a more collaborative way of the importance of the relationship of the artists, the curator, and the community. I use the word curator, but we could expand that to mediators, people specifically engaged with social practice, like in Spanish we say social assistance, and the institutions as well. So Iconoclasistas, this example, they mainly work with organizations that invite them to work in a specific territory. So all the field research and all the engagement with the community living there is something, it's a long-term relationship that organization has or that institution has. I think that is really important, and of course it's always something that needs to be worked with a lot of care, and be very careful of how this relationship is handled. For me, the case of Iconoclasistas is a very interesting one, because with previous collectives that they had been part of in Argentina, working in moments like after dictatorship, or in 2001 when we had one of the strongest economical crises, all their work was very close to activism and citizens that were gathering to have assemblies, or I'm not sure if that's the word, asambleas is in Spanish. So their practice, like in the public sphere and with citizens, it's like long term. So whenever they engage with a new project, they already have this expertise and this know-how. And again, I would stress the importance of their relation also with that organization that it's calling them or inviting them, or in the example I showed, that with the wasteland is with the university, which is based there, and they already have different projects with the community living there. Of course, there can be many other aspects which could be criticized about this type of work, but that's like another topic which I would leave to another part.
Thanks. Yeah, I guess I'll give my own takes on that question. Um, I guess for one, I could mention in the context of the game example that I mentioned, and more generally, kind of games as this kind of um, yeah, generative platform for different publics. I really like the question because yeah, there's a lot of generalization going on in terms of who these tools are for, and yeah, we have all this sugarcoat narrative of empowering people and so forth. But when it comes down to it, um, I guess in the case of the game, you could say that it's somewhat geared toward, I suppose you could say, global north slash west, in the sense that, well, for one, um, the kind of although the design is somewhat modular, that was the word that I was looking for, and kind of creates the space for self-assembled communities to define their own narratives they would like to play with, and such. The fact of the matter is that yeah, there is the question of accessibility to internet in general. There's also a question of uh, time poverty, right? Like people, like a vast majority of people, probably actually around the world, they do not have time, energy, willingness, etc., to engage in this kind of online mapping, etc. It seems so far out from their daily experience, and also the possibility for change in general. It's also, in some ways, when you come from a milieu of, you know, um, uh, underprivilege, it's painful to think about what alternatives could be like in some sense, just because the brutality of everyday reality is kind of so much in your face, right? Um, uh, so yeah, but as I mentioned, like one of the aspirations, I would say, for these kind of games and platforms is this modular design, and this kind of design methodology where participants have these different layers of collective sense making
Mm.
around specific topics or issues. So in that sense, I think that there is some precedent to uh, yeah, to maybe even invoke this kind of more broader general notion of the public here, or more specifically, like the formation of specific communities of practice around specific issues, and using these tools to kind of sense make, uh, uh, yeah, around those, um, and yeah, it's also not very easy to kind of uh, establish participation in this kind of platforms. Like, for example, the Open Futures Library, the kind of library of future scenarios that I mentioned. Um, as I said, it's more like a prototype. It doesn't have a very active, you know, community posting new scenarios, posting new categories through which these scenarios could be then searched and so on. So it is kind of one of the crucial questions. And when we talk about climate crisis and the kind of need for essentially quick change, if we want to stay within 1.5 or 2 degree planetary warming and so forth, I think we do have to think boldly in terms of potentialities of such platforms, quote unquote, changing the world. But then again, there's also, you could say, a proliferation of all kinds of platforms that say they want to do this. So then there's a question of kind of allegiance, or which platforms to pick and so forth. So it's kind of, uh, yeah, although it's great that many initiatives are springing up, it's also very much scattered in some sense. Uh, so yeah, I think that's one of the core questions going forward with such platforms and methods. And well, one of the things is also, yeah, not just how to, engage people with the use. So in this kind of approach, build it and they will come, but more so that also engaging people in the design of such platforms and methods itself as a kind of transformative process, and also, of course, a process of uh, kind of zooming in on what these communities, specific communities situated in specific struggles, really need.
Thank you, Rock. And taking your last comments and answers to the question, I wanted to ask you, um, and because I agree that maybe the scope of analysis or how we should approach these practices, it is of course in terms of what is the real impact. But if we move from that like quantity analysis of utility towards analyzing a little bit more what's the process that happens in order to create all that platforms, like the one of your game, like the one, like the maps of iconoclastistas, which I shared, etc. So I think that maybe the potential is happens and appears more in those processes. So if I was wondering if you could tell us and expand a little bit on which was the process for you to create that game and to put all that information together, because I was also thinking of how could these platforms be translated into other territories and other regions of the world where the concepts will be totally different, right? So it's more
Mm.
about sharing the methodology and not like the finished piece.
Mm. Yeah, that's definitely a challenge that I'm still working with, and probably don't have all the answers quite yet, and probably, yeah, quite some time or never will. But um, well, it's been an interesting process. It's also been kind of like although I and generally we speak a lot about transdisciplinary cooperation with different people, and this has been kind of a one man band in some sense for a lot of the design of this. Although I consulted many people groups in terms of creating this content to start with for this kind of base version of the game. Um, but then, yeah, if I mention again this modular aspect of the design, right? So people, like theoretically, right, if the platform is more salient and like a dedicated online platform is created for the different versions or iterations of this game that can follow from either workshops, design initiatives from all over the world. I guess from that practice itself and what comes out of it, though that would be kind of a first step, and then creating kind of methodology and maybe analytical framework in terms of thinking through yeah the transformative potentials of such things. Uh, yeah, I can also mention maybe that uh, you could say that it is an example of low tech design in terms of uh, yeah, me not being specifically a technology person, or not knowing how to code and things like that. So essentially, I just used what I knew and had at my disposal. For one, the form of the game itself kind of resembles a lot Monopoly. I'm also not a kind of gamer per se or board gamer, um, so kind of stuck with what I know and kind of co-opt or use it for my own purposes. And of course, Monopoly as a game has a very interesting history of how it started as essentially a game about a critical game about yeah, property and such, and then it became a kind of a celebration of it uh, when a man took over the design and yeah, kind of commercialized it. Um, but yeah, for the initial design of the board, I also stuck with what I knew and just used a simple online resource I used before to that's mostly used to create different flow charts and diagrams. So in that sense, it was kind of a low-tech creative practice on my part. But yeah, there's also an online version of it on a platform called Roll20. I don't think it's necessarily open source in terms of that you could see the code of the platform and kind of modify it, create your own uh, under some kind of Creative Commons license or otherwise. But it is kind of open and accessible in terms of that anyone can create their own board game in there using fairly intuitive tools. Yeah.
Thanks. Yeah, I also think that that connection that you make with low tech is really important, and I think it also relates a lot to the example of the artist from Chile that I presented, because they are all approaches that try to highlight the knowledge that we already have and the knowledge of techniques that is already available for us, and not always having this process or approach to having to acquire another knowledge that it's far from us and that we should go through institutions, etc., in order to create something, right? So I think there is a very important aspect on that, and that I hadn't stressed it that clearly when I talked about low tech, but I think it's part of all these practices.
Mm.
Yeah, I think I have this second question related to this. Yeah, it's a bit general, but because in our this project, Embodied Interface Net Art, some of the early net art works, they really state that they want, they think maybe they're activist, or net artworks have anti-institutional potentiality. And so here I want to ask you, like, how does low tech art contribute in this social change, in the sense that, I mean, I'm more focusing on the area of contemporary art, because mostly, you know, artworks, they either go to museums or they are put into commercial white cube and gallery, and I'm just wondering, like, to what extent do low tech artworks contribute, or is it even related? Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. I think it relates to, I would say, three topics or two topics. First of all, I think in the way in which these artists get the resources and the materials that they are working with, that we can find already an anti-institutional aspect in that case, because those are artists that don't need finance or resources provided by companies like high-tech companies, right? Like there are many examples of museums that we see that there are collaborations with technology companies. That's only because of that really expensive or really big money contributions of those technology companies. They can actually develop an exhibition or research. So these are all artists that they use the materials, and how they get those resources. There are in very independent ways, independent in terms of that they are mainly through what their community provides them, what devices are considered obsolete, in even in things. I'm talking for the case of Argentina, what you can find in the street, like thrown away, right? So in that aspect, there is already, in that case, there's already like an autonomy aspect. And also both, or I could say that the three examples that I gave, like Jorge Grohe, Constanza, the artist from Chile, and Leonelo Zambon from Argentina as well, they give workshops. Jorge Grohe, as I mentioned before, he has like a school which is called Ludotecnia, which is like technique of play. So he gives workshops to kids and to elders as well. And so in this knowledge sharing of how you could create your own toys, how you can create your own circuit bending devices, etc. And he invites people to bring their own devices, which are already like maybe in their house considered obsolete. So in this knowledge sharing, I also believe that there is an autonomy aspect. And in the case of Constanza, I also think she contributes a lot to this more way of like a way of living, which is fostering an autonomy approach. She also gives workshops in real to create your own clothes, for example, or to create like she gives a lot of workshops. And so her like her range of work, it's not only towards arts practice, but also like other, like it's a more expanded way, a consideration of what is technology. And as I said, when she also brings back an ancestral technology, I think that in this aspect as well, and offers a way to reconsider this ancestral technology, but how we could use it from a contemporary point of view. I think it's also like an alternative way of thinking that it's offered through these kind of methods.
Yeah, also in terms of Rock's project, the same question maybe can apply as well, because I'm wondering like how a game can make a social change. I know it's a really general question, but maybe you can help us identify the context of to what degree contribute.
And also specifically in the kind of environmental change domain, I think it's interesting because well, it's next year it will be what, like 50 years since the first limits to growth report, right? Kind of problematizing, unlimited economic growth, etc. Although back in that day there was still this kind of neo-Malthusian kind of framework present within, and kind of overpopulation rather than distribution of wealth, even conceptions of what wealth is, and so forth. But where I'm getting at with this is that even today it's very difficult to find like big institutionally backed projects that would kind of have a critical stance, let's say, towards green capitalism, green growth, and so forth, let alone kind of empowering communities to imagine otherwise, or to create alternative narratives, and taking the next step, how to then operationalize that vis-a-vis the hegemonic discourses, how to create very tangible forms of power and exertion of power from the grassroots. Because well, it's quite obvious that kind of these reformist approaches are kind of expecting that those in power and with special interests will just kind of step aside and let the people take power, etc. And it's quite utopian, and it's very rare to find any, if at all, I could name. On one hand, probably I could count initiatives that are backed by a serious money that would approach to tackle these kinds of topics. and that includes games as well. You can find, hundreds of games around climate change, financed by, companies that are, responsible for climate change, um, and it's, implicitly or explicitly very much backing the kind of narratives and structures that actually contribute to the problematic, and specifically this kind of, technological solutionism that's present all throughout the kind of environmental policy domain at the highest levels. So like with engaging more and more and researching more and more these kinds of initiatives, it's more and more clear to me that specifically the funding issue, would you do need some kind of funding and to uh, well, we live in capitalism, right? So we need to kind of make a living, get food somehow, etc., housing to function, and then even have the time to do this kind of stuff. Um, and probably if if a game will change the world, it would probably come through a good crowdfunding campaign rather than big institutional money, I think. And also, of course, there's the other side of the placement of these kind of things, like academia versus the public sphere. And how do you even establish these methods that they are actually used by the public sphere? As I said before, the problems of time poverty, general uh, pessimism around the possibility of change and so forth. And how you can address that is quite an open question still. Yeah. Your
Sam.
I would like to add that in and following what Rock says, that this sort of playing or considering the concept of anti-institutional, of just trying to having to work independently, which I would also like question what independently means, right? Like I think that Rock tackled the thing when like these kind of platforms, I think that they should be work and be articulated with I don't know, education institutions or like museums, etc., because those institutions already have like many years of approaching audiences, or are institutions who are paid attention. So the interesting part for me is how this type of more critical approaches and spaces to think and to question can happen within these institutions, who are also influencing a lot what people think. So I would think that if a game like this would be available throughout primary or high school, it would be already a very important effect on constituting discourses of really young people, which this is something that I could see happening a lot in the place that I was working in London, in Tate Exchange, because of course it is a very critical, like a very polemic institution, Tate, but the space that they were creating in Tate Exchange, it was mainly a space for discussion, and you could see really young people having super interesting discussions about gender issues, discrimination, ecology, etc. So myself looking at that, I was thinking that if I would have had that opportunity while I was in high school, it's already leaving you in another place to approach like daily life, right? So for me, those spaces are super important as well. And I mean, I'm saying that as an example, but of course we could find examples in the work that Iconoclasistas do for me in Argentina. It's also providing that in universities and museums as well.
And just to follow up on that, mentioning, kind of youth as a kind of, a target audience, or the kind of, people that we should focus on in terms of empowering, or building alternative narratives, and so forth. I think I just read today an article that video games have replaced music as the kind of um, medium of youth today. And in that sense, I'm very much interested in the potentialities of games because of their kind of popularity, but also the kind of suspension of disbelief aspect that games provide. Right, you enter a game world, a game logic, and provided it's at least some kind of coherent structure. Um, we as people, as humans, kind of quickly kind of switch toward another mode, and like watching a film, we're kind of immersed in its logic, and but that also goes on the kind of, let's say, funding, or pitching, or uh, projects to different institutions. Like yeah, you could say that serious gaming and things like this is kind of a hot topic right now. And I think from that angle, it's interesting to explore how you could either, you know, uh, explicitly or implicitly kind of use the game form strategically in this sense, right? So kind of, okay, I'm not gonna uh, create just a platform about criticizing growth or something, but I'm going to create a game, and it's the way that you pitch the project, that then maybe you get the chance to build something, and that kind of subversive logic that you're trying to put out there in the world can be actually built into the world, kind of very subtly. It can be very explicit, but it can also be very subtle, and that, I think, gives also new affordances for this type of game as intervention, game platform as intervention.
Yeah, thanks, Rock. I just wanted to add one comment. After your talk, you were saying that in many of um, policy making issues, etc., there's this analysis of what is plausible, and that plausibility limits what is possible. And um, this phrase stuck in my mind, because I think that one of the potentialities of art is that of course there are limits in relation to what resources are available, the time of each artist, etc., etc. But I think that it's a field of action where it's not so much analyzed what it's actually plausible, and because of that there's like a big like freedom in terms of what can we imagine, how can we work together, and not having so much this analysis in the part of the effects, or the like the evaluation of how it's actually going to be useful or not. But it's more about focusing in this part of like creating different links, different possibilities, and different imaginations. So I think that in these terms, your game, the game that you presented, and the cases that we presented have this same search of creating new perspectives, and providing time to imagine, right? And to, of course, this important aspect of putting information together, that it's out there, and that it's like the lived experience of many people, but also having these moments to think together what is actually possible to without having these limitations of plausibility. So I found that really important.
Yeah,
Yeah.
like yeah, there definitely like plausibility, possibility as these kind of also ontological categories, right? That like, I don't know, in my kind of sociology studies and utopian studies and things like that, there's this line of thinking of Ernst Bloch, this kind of anticipatory ontology, and like when I engage with these kind of games and such, yeah, at one level, I think when we talk about, you know, capacity building or imagining or extending the possibility space, um, like that's kind of what we're going for, yeah, the kind of because yeah, we're kind of through the hegemonic narratives kind of given or imprinted certain, yeah, ontological notions of self in relation to the world and our own agency and things like this. And it's both at the kind of very personal level of our thinking of the range of our agency, but it's also like the design of these platforms, forms of art and such that extend kind of the modalities of transformation, right? So, and that's kind of also I think, a shortcoming of a lot of, you know, academic inquiries into, you know, so-called social or sustainability transformations and transitions. A lot of them kind of follow a kind of structuralist logic, or kind of, you know, there's talk of, you know, socio-technical transitions, of how, you know, the coupling of social and technical systems and how they change through time and so forth. But they don't really account for the very specific ways in which, you know, art approaches this, and kind of aesthetics, and how that kind of can contribute to change, and the, you know, the very specific modalities, either a very specific game or a platform or a way of combining or using knowledge, uh, like to articulate, you know, theories of transformation around that, as these kind of very specific strategies that these kind of more abstract meta notions of change are just unable to kind of capture in their framework.
Yeah, cool. I think that in this aspect, it's also showing for us this project for us is already an example of the potential of transdisciplinary in a, like, from a very small example, but I think that all this knowledge and perspectives of analysis that you have from your field, and what we can contribute from the art field, I think that it's much more powerful when put together, or when looked at it from a transversal way, at least. Yeah, I think that, because I had a last question, but I think in a way it has already been mentioned. I don't know if there was any other thing we wanted to mention.
Yeah, then I guess I haven't really asked the question, just engaged in discussion. But I don't know if it's somewhat challenging or kind of something that we've talked about before, but it is this kind of, you know, again, I return to the, you know, definition, quote unquote, of net art, and, you know, like, and also given the history of the concept, and it, you know, wasn't really meant to be this kind of ironclad concept, but more as a kind of dispersed movement of different ideas, connected to affordances of the internet. Um, and yeah, my specific kind of take on this was, not just, you know, an art that's somewhere on the internet and you can look at it, but more of the kind of co-generative aspect of it. Okay, you have this canvas, but then you can use it to generate, and think about what it is that you need to generate, and again, how to then operationalize what you generated in the real world to actually effectuate real change. And I think those are still open questions, and a lot of artists, either when they're writing curatorial statements or stuff, using big words, and this is kind of empowering and blah 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 and this and that, but when it comes down to it, I haven't really seen examples of art, broadly speaking, or games that actually walk the talk here. Yeah. So I guess I haven't really asked the question, but more like, yeah, I think we shouldn't get too much stuck on a definition of net art, I suppose, here, and I think our kind of uh, branching of inquiry here is quite valid, I suppose, in this context. But maybe you have your own takes on kind of what we said here, vis-a-vis like kind of quote unquote the definition of net art.
Yeah, I would say that because this was like a process of research, so net art has helped us to, in a way, like have a starting point. If we look at net art as this group or tendency of creating artwork with what internet provided, like in the 90s and so on. But I feel that right now it has helped only in a way as a good excuse, also to look at these ways of, as you very clearly put in words, like co-generative aspect of net art, and how we can also find that in other ways. So when I was sharing this project with some colleagues, they were telling me, I don't know anything about net art, or I'm not that interested in internet culture. But I was answering, but this is mainly about how we work collectively, I believe. And of course it has an aesthetic aspect that, like, if we stick to net art, is very specific. But then when we look about to these other examples of collective working or creating platforms, that it's, I think platforms is a much more valid word now for us to use. And it is mainly about working collectively, putting knowledge together, and as you said, also creating commons. And it's this aspect that for me has been part of art through art history. It's this possibility of creating lasting relationships of work and collaboration. So this, I think it's something that net art takes it in a way, and does a specific thing that, but for us as curators, I'm talking at least for myself, it's much more interesting to see how that strategy and dynamic happens in net art, but it also repeats and replicates in other ways of working. And as also Tiago, one of the artists that it's part of our project, helps us to think, it's not about sticking to what is possible to happen in internet, but also seeing how we can learn about what is possible in the internet, and vice versa, what we can take from the internet to our social relationships, and how we can also transform the internet throughout our knowledge, like offline knowledge, without having a naive approach to it, right? Because and also understanding the constant change of the limitations and surveillance that is part of internet use as well.
Yeah, I think throughout this project, we are not so interested in the specific era in art history where net art start, and try to like analyze it as an art movement or really specific superstars in net art. Although we invite some superstar, but I think everyone agreed that like the new kind of art history is sort of non-linear and relational, and there's no like one origin of one art movement or one format of art. So So we also agree on Joseph Bosman's definition of net art, that is like anti-movement, anti-history, and also like against the concept of medium specificity. So what we are discussing here is also, as you said, like co-generative process of art, and also the whole like the general internet culture, how it influences and what is the value behind it. For example, platform accessibility, commons, and also this idea that internet has the potential to be like a democratic medium, although this is debatable, but this is like a direction, and we are pretty sure that we are more easy to access more information and work more internationally than before. Like I mean, people who have access to internet. So this is, I think, in the end, our real topic of net art is like how internet culture mutually influence art and culture and the production of art. And also now we have more power to create things independently uh, by using internet, and also aware of like how to co-create sort of on an equal basis, so no hierarchy like institution, or when you work in a museum, you have this like social stratification and a hierarchical way of working. Yeah. So I think so then we are shifting from like strictly definition of net art in art history into a more like a culture or philosophy of technology domain to discuss, and also that can relate it to sociology in general. Yeah.
Yeah, I think those are pretty good, good like closing thoughts.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that it's good to stop there as well.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.